Good morning, fifth grade. This is Miss Corkins, and today we are going to be learning about chapter 3 and 4. So, a few things you're going to need for our lesson today is you're going to need your packet, and also make sure that you have the student reader available just in case you want to refer back to it or see an up close version of it than on my PowerPoint slide. All right, guys, let's get started. So here's a quote that really spoke to me this week, just with the conversations I've been having with students and being stuck inside. I know some students you're probably starting to get a little bored, and that's completely normal and natural. I know I'm definitely feeling the boredom as well, being stuck inside. So I thought this was a really cool quote. It says, "Reading gives us somewhere to go when we have to stay where we are." And I definitely recommend to all of you that if you're finding that you have extra time on your hands, that maybe you take this opportunity and you find a really good book that you love and just get invested in it. I know I read probably about 2 or 3 hours a day. I try to, and I know that when I do read, it's just very relaxing and soothing, and it just kind of takes me out of what's going on in the world right now around us. So it's a really great way to kind of help just create a nice distraction for ourselves. And it's always cool to kind of read a good book, even if it's just trying to figure out what kind of books that we do like. I just definitely recommend that you just pick up a book and you try, because what do you have to lose except for possibly being entertained? So it's just something to think about as this week progresses. So for our lesson, our objective today is, for chapter 3, I can describe the geographical features, climate, and population of the Mid-Atlantic region. And I can explain the climate, population, history, and landforms of states in the South. So today we're reading chapter 3 and chapter 4. And of course, we're covering the Mid-Atlantic region and also the South. So here is our agenda. I have a quick warm-up for you, and you're not going to need any extra materials for this warm-up. You can even just do it in your head if you want to. So we have a quick warm-up to kind of review and get our brains thinking about the content we learned yesterday. After our warm-up, we're going to go ahead and review what we went over in chapter 1 and 2. I'm going to read the big question for chapter 3. I will read chapter 3 to you, and then you're responsible for reading chapter 4 on your own using the electronic reader. And also, I'm going to talk about student work expectations today. And then, as always, at the end, I'm going to give you that friendly reminder to check your student email and you look at your checklist for additional work. So first, let's go to our warm-up. Now, with this warm-up, you can write it down if you want on a piece of scratch paper. You can just think about it in your head. You can say it out loud. However you want to do this. I want you to think about what your big takeaway was from chapter 1 and 2 about the United States. What's the thing that really stuck out in your brain from those 2 chapters? Go ahead and pause this video to think about your big takeaway. Okay, now that we paused and we thought about it, I will go ahead and share my big takeaway. And my big takeaway from chapter 1 and 2 is just how unique the United States really is as a country and as a whole, because we are a huge, huge country. And I guess I never realized how big our country really was until I read about it yesterday, and I learned that it was 3,000 miles from coast to coast. That is a huge distance. And I also think about the uniqueness of our country, about how we're divided into states instead of separate countries. We're the only country in the world that has states. So I just thought that was really interesting from yesterday's read aloud. So let's go ahead and review chapter 1 and 2. Chapter 1 we should have learned that the United States is in the Western Hemisphere of the world, and it is a part of the North America. And that the Atlantic Ocean borders the East Coast and the Pacific Ocean borders the West Coast. In Chapter 2, we should have learned that New England region is made up of states of Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. In this region, it's important to note that fishing and shipbuilding were important economic activities, and that the area was settled by the English, and that Boston was one of the 13 colonies' most important cities. I like to give a big shout out to Miss Kearns because she is from Massachusetts. So if you do get to communicate with Miss Kearns, or if you ever call her and check up on her, you can tell her that you're learning about her region that she's from. Big question for Chapter 3 today. What are the main features of New York City and Washington, D.C.? So today, as we're reading, I want you to try to figure out what are some main features of these two regions. All right, so let's get started. If you would like, this is a great time to pull up your electronic reader for Chapter 3 and turn it to the Mid-Atlantic region, because we're going to get started and start reading. Chapter 3, the Mid-Atlantic region. Exploring the Mid-Atlantic region. As you recall from my last message, Admiral, we are excited because we are on our way from New England to New York City. New York City is in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. This region is located near the middle of the Atlantic coastline. It includes 5 states: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and the city of Washington, D.C., which is the capital of the United States. New York City, as you may recall, is the most populated city in America and one of the most populated cities on Earth. It is made up of 5 areas called boroughs: Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. Manhattan is the most densely populated borough. So here's a picture of the Mid-Atlantic region, and it's important that you look really closely to this map because there are many port cities in the Mid-Atlantic region, and 2 of these port cities are in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Trenton, and New Jersey are located on the Delaware River. So you can all see that in that map. That's pretty cool. So I want you to go ahead and look at this map. And I want you to try to see if you can figure out which Mid-Atlantic states share a land or water border with Canada. So go ahead and take a few minutes and look at the map and see if you can find which states share land or water border with Canada. You can go ahead and feel free to pause this video so you can take your time to really find these states. All right, now that we took the time to pause the video, the answer is New York and Pennsylvania border Canada. Let's continue with the Mid-Atlantic region. As we read the next section, I want you to think about what are some cultural attractions of New York City. So what are the things that really stand out from New York that you think people would want to go and see? Well, the first thing we noticed were the extremely tall buildings, or skyscrapers, in Manhattan. There are so many skyscrapers packed so closely together that when you walk between them, you can hardly see the sky itself. New York City is very, very crowded. Many people come to visit and to live in the famous city. Most of the time, the sidewalks are packed with people and the streets are packed with cars. Everyone seems to be in a hurry. A large wave of people came to live in New York City in the 1800s. These immigrants came from countries all around the world. Many moved to New York City because they were looking for a better way of life. You see, Admiral, the United States is a country of immigrants. Since the country's beginning, people have come from faraway places to make their homes in America. For many immigrants, the first thing they saw when they sailed into New York Harbor was a gigantic metal statue called the Statue of Liberty. This statue is the shape of a woman holding a torch. It is supposed to stand for the freedom that Americans enjoy. We took a ferry boat out to the statue and discovered that you can walk up inside it. By the time we got to the top of the 354 steps, we were exhausted. Things to do in New York City. When immigrants moved to New York City, they brought along the different kinds of food they ate back home. That means you can get almost any kind of earth food imaginable when visiting the city. The crew enjoyed sampling many of these different dishes. In an area called Chinatown, we ate several of the crispy snacks called egg rolls. In Little Italy, we picked up some sweet treats called cannolis. At a hot dog stand, we had Polish sausages called kielbasa. But there is more to do in New York than eat. Lots more. New York City is full of cultural attractions, concert halls, theaters, and museums. In Manhattan, Broadway is famous for its theaters, where you can watch musicals and plays. I especially like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is also in Manhattan. There you can see some of the most famous art Earthlings have ever made. Because she is so interested in plants and animals, Lieutenant Kula preferred the Museum of Natural History. So now I want you to go ahead and think about, why is Washington, D.C. the only city that isn't in a state? She showed me the big skeletons of some extinct earth animals called dinosaurs. Both of the museums are located near a large space called Central Park. The park also has lakes, fields, a theater, a zoo, and other places for people to gather or play. Of course, we also went to the library. We found the New York Public Library is an impressive building guarded by 2 stone lions. We spent some time there looking up facts about New York and the other states of the Mid-Atlantic region. We found out, for example, that the area has a climate pretty much like New England's. However, the summers are hotter and the winters are not as cold. We also learned that the states of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland are among the most heavily populated in the country. Their many large cities are centers of industry and government. In fact, the headquarters of the national government is a place called Washington, D.C., located in the southern part of the region. We decided to make Washington, D.C. our next stop. Exploring the capital. Washington, D.C. is the only American city that is not in a state. It is the capital of the entire country. That means it cannot be a part of any one state because that state would hold too much power. So the city is its own district or area, the District of Columbia. That is why Washington is referred to as Washington, D.C. Using D.C. also stops people from confusing Washington State with the city of Washington. On the way to Washington, D.C., we flew over some other interesting cities in the area. In Pennsylvania, we flew over Philadelphia. In Maryland, we flew over Baltimore. We also flew over a body of water called the Chesapeake Bay, which was covered with hundreds of small fishing boats. We had read that wonderful seafood comes from this bay. Chesapeake's Bay is especially famous for its crabs, which are supposed to be sort of like lobsters, but smaller and rounder. When we arrived in Washington, D.C., we noticed that the city has wide straight streets called avenues. There are a lot of grand buildings where the people who run in the government work. Maybe the grandest building is the U.S. Capitol, with its large white dome. This is where Congress makes America's laws. Congress is made up of elected lawmakers from every state. So let's go back to that question. Why is Washington, D.C. the only city that isn't a state? Go ahead and pause this video to think about it. If you said because Washington, D.C. is the capital of the entire country and it was kept separate in its own district because they didn't want one state to have too much power, you would be correct. So go ahead and give yourself a pat in the back if you got that answer correct. Good job. Let's continue reading about the Mid-Atlantic region. To the west of the capital is a long grassy area called the National Mall. Usually when Americans talk about a mall, they mean a shopping center full of stores. But the National Mall is definitely not a shopping center. Instead, it is a place where Americans gather for different kinds of celebrations. Right in the middle of the National Mall is a huge stone obelisk, more than 500 feet tall. An obelisk is a four-sided shaft that narrows to a pyramid-like point. This one is called the Washington Monument. It is built in honor of America's first president, George Washington. As you may recall, Admiral, the president is the head of the national government. At the far end of the National Mall is the Lincoln Memorial. This structure honors another great American president, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was president during the 1860s. Inside the memorial is a very large statue of Lincoln, 3 or 4 times the size of the real human being. He is seated in a chair and looks very serious and commanding. Near the National Mall is a house where today's president lives. When we saw it, we thought he was lucky to live in an elegant white house with tall pillars in front of the door. Americans call the president's home the White House. When it was time for some study, we went to the Library of Congress. This is the biggest library in the United States. There we looked up facts about the next region, the South. All right, boys and girls, so this takes us to our chapter 4. So remember, chapter 4 you're going to read on your own. It's called the South. Now you can find this reader, the electronic version of it, on the Clever page, or it's attached to this YouTube video below. So either way you can get to that video. It's up to you. Now you're going to read chapter 4, and I really want you to really look out for this big question and pay attention to how might the physical geographic features contribute to the development of the regional culture of the South, okay? So really pay attention to that big question as you're reading chapter 4. After you are done reading about chapter 4, you're going to go ahead and look for week 1 and Tuesday. Now this page, you're going to text a picture of the completed work with your name. So this is kind of a cool picture. So what you're going to do is you're going to use the encyclopedia or internet to research the 5 U.S. territories that we will not be covering in the unit. So what you're going to do is you're going to draw in color each territory's flag in the box. So for example, on the first example, it says Puerto Rico. In that box, you're going to draw a picture of what Puerto Rico's flag looks like. Then you're going to answer the questions that follow, such as when did Puerto Rico become a U.S. territory, and what is the capital of Puerto Rico? You're going to do this again for the others as well, for U.S. Virgin Islands and so on. When you're done and you have texted a picture of that work to Ms. Corkins, don't forget to review your daily checklist in your packet and to check your student email for Google Meet session invites. So like I've said before, I also have a video on YouTube, on our YouTube channel about this, but just make sure you know, like, we are sending out invites to our Google Meet sessions this week. Ms. Yosef and Mr. Sheeline will be sending you out these invites as well, so make sure you're checking and you're looking for that. And also don't forget that to have some fun today. After you finish your work, after you finish iReady and Zern and all that awesome stuff that you are required to do, make sure you go outside and have some fun, or maybe read a great book. I hope you stay safe out there, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye. Have a good one.